AC Milan have scored 6 goals from their opening 2 matches. The last time they scored as many goals from the opening 2 games was almost a decade ago. But here's the thing, the club's still not satisfied and they want to add more pieces to their attack. And the profile that is back in the picture is that of Mehdi Taremi, as Milan sent board members to Portugal to finalize a deal for the Iranian striker. And the Athletic's James Horncastle explains how mistakes were made by Paolo Maldini and Ricky Massara in some key signings the last summer window, and how Milan's CEO Giorgio Forlani has been kept busy trying to fix those errors. Well, these are some of the profiles that we're going to be looking at in today's episode of Rumor or Real. Now, jumping into this report by The Athletic where Horncastle essentially talks about Milan's past management. And you know, one of the criticisms that has been leveled to Maldini and Massara's management, even for myself, was maybe they were patient to a fault. Patient with Donnarumma for his contract, believing that eventually he's going to extend. The same thing with Hakan Çalhanoğlu and then with Franck Kessie. The one thing that has to be said about the present Milan management is they're a little less patient. Now, some of those players were replaced perfectly by Maldini. However, some of the other signings just weren't up to par. And that's not exactly the criticism that to me is a problem for Maldini and Massara. You know, not every executive is going to find 100% of players that are perfect. However, something that Horncastle brings to light is the fact that Divock Origi was a player that Milan's data analysts and the back-end people didn't really buy into as much. They actually made their concerns pretty clear to Maldini and Massara. They highlighted how there wasn't enough data to be able to tell if this player was good. He wasn't getting enough minutes. There were injury issues with this player. And in spite of all of that, Maldini and Massara chose to still sign the player because they believed he was a low-risk proposition because he was coming for free, even though his salary was pretty much the highest in the team at that point. And as Horncastle summarizes it, a player that cost next to nothing delivered next to nothing. And in that respect, the Milan management headed by Forlani and Moncada, they've been a little bit more direct in their approach. They've pushed for an AC Milan through Stefano Pioli that is direct on the field, but also a management style that is direct on the back end. And a lot of Forlani's work this summer has been to correct the mistakes that were made in the past summer and before that. And as the article highlights, Ante Rebic is no longer part of Milan. Messias is gone. Charles de Ketelaere, even though a 35 million signing, only 1 season at the club, they didn't want to be any more patient with him. They moved him on to Atalanta. So as time progresses, we start to see more and more reasons as to what Paolo Scaroni meant when he said that Paolo Maldini wasn't willing to be as much of a team member. And eventually, none of these moves panning out whatsoever led to his eventual firing. Which perfectly brings us to the possible departure of Divock Origi. From the looks of it right now, it seems like there are a couple of possible locations where this player could end up. The 2 teams that are being named are Torino and Burnley from the Premier League. At the end of the day, the benefit to Milan really with this player, unlike Charles de Ketelaere, this was a free transfer. So the benefit to Milan will be really getting this player's salary off the books. And any revenue that the club gets from this particular sale will essentially be capital gains. However, the club will have to pay back a 2 million tax relief that they got under the growth decree for this player. If a foreign player joins a Serie A side, there's possibility of a tax relief. However, if that player, in this case Divock Origi, doesn't play with Milan for 2 years, that particular tax relief has to be given back. So Origi's departure from Milan, at this point, I think it's pretty obvious. It's real. Milan want him gone. Milan even want Colombo to be loaned out to Monza. They want to thin out their squad for the next player that we're going to be talking about. And the player that is most likely to replace him, once again, is Mehdi Taremi. Now, if there's one player that I've made the most videos about in Rumor or Real over the years since I started the channel, who still hasn't joined the club, it has to be Mehdi Taremi. And as covered in the recent past, I never actually gave up on the possibility of this player coming to Milan. Usually when I take screenshots of certain articles, I just delete them after the video is done. But in Taremi's case, on my desktop, I specifically made a folder for this player because I've always had a feeling that this move will eventually happen. And according to Fabrizio Romano, Milan will try till the very end to bring this player to the San Siro. Everybody's talked about the fact that Milan has had an agreement in principle with Taremi himself. Initial reports suggested that was till 2027. Some latest tweets by Skira mentions that it's till 2026. Taremi at Porto is making about 1.8 million a season. Milan already has an agreement with him for 3 million a season. So when it comes to the back end of it all, between Milan and the Iranian player, it's all done. However, the problem here naturally is Porto. So here's where things get a little bit complicated. When it comes to Taremi's ability to score goals, I'm gonna put this graphic back up again. I don't think there's much doubt. This guy has been scoring and assisting regularly for Porto season after season. So I don't have much of a doubt when it comes to his potential, especially surrounded with the attacking quality that this AC Milan now seems to have. However, considering the fact that the player only has 1 year left on his contract, Porto, for whatever reason, seem to be asking for 25 25 million for this guy. And that's where things are getting complicated because Milan absolutely does not agree with that evaluation. So in the past, it was reported that Milan did make an offer around that 13 to 14 million mark for the player, and it was immediately rejected by Porto. And after that, the links kind of cooled off, but then Inter stepped in. Looked like they made an offer too, or they had some ongoing inquiry with Porto, and that didn't pan out. Then Di Marzio reported Spurs, who lost Harry Kane, also got in touch with Porto. That didn't pan out. So this kind of tells me, as I've predicted in the past, over time, as the Mercato comes to its close, now Porto really only have 5 days to cash out on this player. If they don't cash out on this player in 5 days, if he doesn't sign a renewal with them, he will leave for free next year. And seeing the fact that it didn't work out with Inter or with Spurs, hasn't worked out with Milan yet, they might be willing to lower their asking demand. Nicolo Schira earlier reported that Milan will be making an offer on 15 million with added bonuses of about 3 million. That will bring it up to 18 million. And I feel like when a club is asking for 25 million for a player that has 1 year left on his contract, 18 million with bonuses included, that seems fairly reasonable. However, now Gianluca Di Marzio is reporting that Milan is willing to make an offer of 20 million for the player, but it's a take it or leave it offer. No more negotiations for this guy. There have been suggestions that after Porto's match today against Rio Ave, the rossoneri management has apparently sent some boardroom members to complete this negotiation, and they are headed to Portugal to get this done. So a striker signing is key for Milan. Looks like this is the profile they've picked out, and on the rumor real meter at this point in time, guys, with all the news that is coming out today, I think this is absolutely real. And honestly, guys, absolutely have my fingers crossed. I think this would be a dream move for me if Mehdi Taremi comes to the rossoneri. Which brings us to a shock piece of news that we received from Milan's Mercato, an unexpected possible departure, that of Pierre Kalulu to Bayern Munich. And from the looks of it, it's because Bayern are trying to sell Pavard to Inter. Pavard, who throughout the summer multiple times was dropping hints about wanting to join AC Milan, even training in a Milan shirt, is on the way, possibly headed to Inter. However, Bayern are a little bit resistant about selling the player until they actually place a replacement for him. And from the looks of it, one of the profiles they've picked out is that of Pierre Kalulu. Now, there's some sentiment amongst Milan fans about how Milan should not let this move happen because that sends Benjamin Pavard to Inter. Guys, that's secondary to me. I'm not really bothered by who Inter is buying or they're selling. We really have to be focused on our own team only. And keep in mind, during Milan's glory days, Inter had a pretty decent squad themselves, and they were constantly watching this AC Milan side lift Champions League titles after Champions League titles. I think it's a semi-beta move to say, oh, don't sell them Kalulu because then they're going to get Pavard. No, how about how much are you going to offer us for Kalulu? Let's hear that number, because from the looks of it right now, Milan have told Bayern, we're not even coming to the negotiating table if you're not offering a minimum of 30 million for this player. Do I think Kalulu is worth 30 million? I don't really think so. He's had one really good season with Milan where we won the Scudetto, but outside of that, there hasn't been much. But as I said in the beginning of the video, I like this Milan management's approach. They're a little bit more headstrong and direct. They don't say, oh no, that guy's not available for sale. They say, well, how much are you going to give us? And at this point in time, on the rumor real meter, Pierre Kalulu to Bayern Munich, I think right now it probably is just a rumor. I think maybe there's been some inquiry, but I don't think there's a concrete offer that the club has received for the player. And at the same time, Inter can still get Benjamin Pavard. There's the profile of Trevor Chalobah that Bayern Munich are also considering. So thinking about it from that mindset of, oh, don't sell them Kalulu because they might get a really good player, I think that's a little bit of a weak mentality. But Kalulu to Bayern right now, I don't think so. Milan already has a pretty thin squad when it comes to our defense. So for me, a player that is already part of the system, played alongside Ficato Mori, has been a deputy to Davide Calabria, I think Milan should probably hold on to him. And then there's a sad story of Alexis Saelemaekers' departure from the club. From the looks of it right now, he's going to be headed to Bologna. It might be a loan plus option. I hope it's a more permanent solution, but at this point in time, the reports are a loan plus option to buy. The issue with Alexis is this. I mean, if you really look back and you see how, Rafael Leao was signed as a left winger, Alexis Saelemaekers was signed as a right winger, they both came to the club at pretty much the same time. If they were both brought in at the club at about a 5 out of 10, Leao progressed to an 8.5 to 9. Alexis at the same time, he went from 5 to 7, and then he dropped back down to 5, and then 8 at times, and then he drops down to 3. His roadmap at Milan has been very inconsistent. Outside of probably between 2019 to 2021, where he was still pretty influential, but that entire Milan team was young and it was coming up. Now that the team has actually made it, a lot of the young characters are permanent fixtures at this team. Alexis never solidified himself on the squad. And maybe you could partly blame the coach for that in some ways. He constantly constantly wanted to play Junior Messias ahead of Alexis, but that might be saying a little bit more about Alexis as well. There's a possibility that he wasn't impressing the coach, maybe even during training. We saw certain glimpses of what he could do, that goal against Napoli, scoring a couple of goals in the first couple of matches in the Champions League last season. And overall, I do feel a little bit of sympathy for Alexis because he was pretty disappointed. There were reports that he was very sad when he was dropped against the opening match against Bologna. He wasn't even part of Milan's squad for that game. And from the looks of it, at this point in time, he's going to be headed to that very club. So on the rumor reveal meter, I think this is very much real. Alexis Saelemaekers' time at Milan, unfortunately, that's come to an end now. And there you have it, Milanisti. Those are the profiles we wanted to look at today. There were reports of Taremi and reports of Lukaku. Now it's evident Lukaku is headed to Roma. So Milan still need that center forward up front. Hopefully Gianluca Di Marzio's latest report that this is Milan's final offer to Porto at 20 million will get accepted, and the rossoneri will finally have some depth in the center forward role. You guys make sure, if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell notification so you can watch these videos as soon as I upload them. And as always, Forza Milan, grazie mille e ciao tutti!